All right, and sitting down with us today for the Dine Sports podcast, we have Jon Pessah, who is a founding editor of ESPN the Magazine, a New York Times bestselling author whose new book, Yogi, Life Behind the Mask, is out for sale right now, available everywhere. Jon, thanks for joining us today.
Kyle, it's been great to talk to you.
Yeah, so first off, how are things in your neck of the woods? Everything going as well as can be sort of expected given the state of the world right now?
We got hit hard at the beginning. In March and April, it was a war zone. No one went out of their house. And if you're living on Long Island in New York City and you see nobody,
Yeah.
it is really, really strange. I'd say we went through the worst. Our governor, really came up big. And for the most part, people do what they're supposed to do. There are people who kind of refuse to wear masks, but for the most part, so I think we are probably as good as it gets. The hospitals are starting to get tested again, like everywhere else in the country. But in Los Angeles, somebody dies once every 7 minutes in Los Angeles County.
Holy jeez.
So that's where, there are places that are really, really getting slammed in this country. And Biden has a big task ahead of him, but we're hopeful that he brings an organization that can get the vaccines out and we can get through this and having some semblance of normal life again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, both of your books that you've released lately have been painstakingly researched, right? The Game, it took you almost 5 years to write.
Right.
Yogi, it took you almost 4 years.
Right.
Are you sort of enjoying this downtime that you have now, or have you been using all this downtime of staying at home to launch yourself full on into a new project here?
Well, I'll tell you, at first it was just surreal.
Yeah.
Trying to sell a book during a pandemic is a challenge.
Yeah.
Last time around, for 2 weeks, when you walked into Barnes and Noble, The Game was the first thing you saw at Father's Day, which is a big sales day. And the same thing around Christmas time. Now, you're limited if you can walk into a Barnes and Noble, if they're even open, and people are still afraid to go out. So it's, it was a lot of pushing on radio and Zoom chats and everything else, which started to get normal. And now it's just like, okay, I'm kind of ready to go out, and I'm planning on doing a biography on Dean Smith at the moment. And, but all you can do is talk to people on the phone, and my line of work, really, you need to sit down and talk to people.
Yeah.
And because it's as you said, 3-4 year project. These people are with you. They get to know you, and it's very hard to do that over the phone. Certainly initially.
Yeah. So, when you think of Yankees baseball, even with all of the legends that have worn the pinstripes over the years, pretty high on the list is still Yogi Berra. The name is almost synonymous with the Yankees there. And, Hall of Fame career, he's almost a cultural icon, but all through his life growing up there, he had nothing but doubters in his way. Even his own father never thought that he would really amount to anything in baseball. When you were researching the book, did it almost surprise you how much resistance he sort of had to overcome to finally even make the major leagues to begin with?
Yeah, I didn't know that part of his story. I'm a Yankee fan. It's something handed down from generations. My father to me, to my kids, to my 2-year-old grandson now is a Yankee fan. And I came of age, I'm a baby boomer, so 1960 is when I really start remembering baseball. And by then, Yogi is a part-time, good role player, outfield, occasional catcher, becomes a manager. But I don't get to see the Yogi Berra that my father saw, who told me just great things about what an unbelievable player he was. You can see the stats, but it's different. For me, I saw Mickey Mantle. I saw the majestic home runs. That's what, that's what I saw. And I saw a really good, kind of odd looking guy in left field who was kind of funny. And it was surprising he became our manager. But I really didn't know that part of him. I also didn't know, really what kind of a person he was. My best friend is Claire Smith, who's now in the Hall of Fame herself in the writer's wing. And she was my Yankee writer at the Hartford Courant. She's my best friend. And she covered Yogi in his last tour with the Yankees and just told me what a completely different person he was than public persona. And, so when I started doing the research, as you said, people, looked at him. He does not look like a prototype athlete. Yeah. He looks like he's put together with spare parts, really good spare parts, but he's got the legs of a guy who's 6'2", a torso of someone who's 5'6", huge shoulders, hides the neck, big head. He's actually bilingual, but not especially proficient in English. So a lot of things kind of come out funny. So yeah, people didn't think of him as an athlete. His father didn't want him to play baseball because baseball, the only game he knew was soccer.
Yeah.
And baseball, games were for kids. If you're a man, you work. Now, we're talking about depression mentality. And so he didn't want him to play. And Yogi had four brothers, all of them, three brothers, all of them really good baseball players in their own right, had offers to play, and Yogi's father said no. And his brother stepped in, and this is towards the end of the depression. They said, we can get some more shifts. We'll make the money. You let Yogi play. And over his father's better judgment, he went off and played baseball. And I guess, as the rest we say, is history.
Yeah. I think that decision panned out for him all right in the end.
Panned out for him all right. Yes.
Yeah. So do you think that, all of that doubt, and whether it was coming from the coaches early on or, his father, do you think it was that sort of put that chip on his shoulder, which ultimately propelled him to the success that he did end up having?
Yogi didn't have a chip on his shoulder as much as he was just supremely confident in what he was. He knew he was good. And if other people didn't know it, well, by the middle of the first game they played against him, they knew that they were playing against. And he was like that in everything he tried. He was a great football player, terrific punter, good passer. He was a great soccer player. The only game he couldn't play was basketball. Don't know why, but basketball was outside of his realm. But everything else, he was really good. And there's a fun story in the book about they went to the local YMCA. There was a ping pong tournament. He had never played it in his life. He picked up the paddle. Joe Garagiola, his best friend and across the street neighbor, tells this story. And he picks up the paddle and he finishes second. He was to the champion. And he was just that kind of athlete. So he knew that he had it. He was, people made fun of his looks. People made fun of how he talked. And that bothered him a lot. And fueling that was when he married his wife, Carmen Berra, who they were married for 65 years. She really resented that. She knew he wasn't a dummy, but that's the way he was portrayed, as kind of a laughable dummy in the media, by the print media. And for most of Yogi's career, print is dominant. So the only way that you get to know who the guy is through reading your daily newspaper. And they portrayed him as kind of a funny, happy-go-lucky, too dumb to feel pressure player who, always came through in the clutch, because Yogi always came through in the clutch.
Yeah. And I'm always curious too, when you're putting a book of this scale together, obviously you're doing hundreds of interviews out there, and you've got the super common ones, the relatives and the coaches and teammates that you had over the years. But is there maybe a person or two who really stood out to you as a source that had great Yogi stories, that was maybe sort of a secondary character, whether it was, a bat boy or a high school friend, that was just this unbelievable source of, great Yogi stories that you were able to use for the book?
Yeah, absolutely. My first book started in 1990. By 1990, I'm well into my career. I'm covering baseball. I know all about what's going on with the labor negotiations. I covered the steroid scandal, and those are the two arcs of the first book. This one starts in 1925. Mm-hmm. And while I can, read and understand what the Depression was like and what World War II was like, I didn't live it. And so, you're looking for those kind of people who can really bring you in. And there were three men who I looked up, but, Yogi died about 5 months into this book. Mm-hmm. And they were in the obits, and everyone wrote obits about him. I read the local obits, and there were three men who grew up on the same street or a block away as Yogi. And I asked the Hill Neighborhood Association, which was very, very helpful in finding people for me, could they bring those people together and I would interview them. And they cautioned me that, well, they'd be happy to do it. They're all 90 years old. They'd be happy to do it, but they've already told their best stories about Yogi to the Daily Prince. Said, just have them there. Yeah. And we went, and we sat at a big round table. I put my iPhone up to videotape it so I didn't have to keep saying who, identify yourself. And we talked for 3.5 hours. And they told me stories about what it was like to grow up Italian on that street, seeing Yogi from the time he was 5 years old, what he was like on the field, what he was like, what the family was like, what living on the hill, which was all Italian, and Italian was the first language on the hill, was like, you know, what it was like to go off to war. And they were, the three of them, sadly, only one of them is still with us, but the three of them were terrific. We did 2 sessions like that. And then I had, I called them every so often just to kind of go through things and see if they were fill out some more stories. And if you look at the book, you'll see, courtesy of Vince Quinn Garavaglia, and he gave me. He lived in the house at the end of the block. Joe Buck ended up renting that house, and he and Yogi were good friends, and he had all these pictures of Yogi growing up and things like that, and they were just terrific. The stories were amazing, as was, I'll mention one other person, Joe Garagiola Jr. His father was ill, but you know, while I was doing this book, and past the first year I was doing it, but Joe was terrific. Joe gave me a picture of Yogi and Joe selling Christmas trees. It's in the book. Selling Christmas trees when they were both major league players, but the major league players didn't make that much money, and you sold Christmas trees in the off season to help make ends meet. And he would, the questions that he didn't know, he would take to his mom, who, you know, he was kind of like the conduit, and she answered all my questions about what it was like growing up and what it was like dating, you know, Yogi and Carmen. They would double date with Joe and Audrey, and it was, yeah, those stories were amazing.
Yeah, amazing. Just a different era of sport, eh?
Of life, yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned even earlier, and you know, it's worth bringing up again. Berra's career really was sort of in 2 different superstar eras, where you had DiMaggio for the first half, you had Mantle for sort of the second half there. It would have been really easy for him to sort of be overshadowed and almost just forgotten in the churn of Yankees folklore. But here we are, you know, 2021, and you know, he's as recognizable as ever name-wise there. What do you think you would attribute that enduring power of the Yogi legacy to there?
Yeah, well, people just fell in love with who Yogi was. And Yogi was one of the first television stars in America. And you know, the rise of TV tracks Yogi's career. And he was always on it because the Yankees were always in the World Series, and then the game of the week. So you always saw him. He did commercials, everything from Camel cigarettes to, you know, a fish bait oil. And he was on game shows. He was on the Ed Sullivan Show, which is, you know, was everybody in America watched Ed Sullivan. Everyone watched Milton Berle. Everyone watched Perry Como. There wasn't a million channels. There were 3. You know, those were the things that people watched, and he was on all of them. He was on game shows. So people got to know him. And unlike, you know, Joe DiMaggio was mysterious. Ted Williams was fierce and, you know, looked the athlete. Yogi looked like your next door neighbor. And, you know, you would go bowling with Yogi, you know, and he was just your average guy. And Yogi stayed in his mind the average guy. I mean, he knew he was famous, obviously. He made more money than most people in that era, obviously. But as a person, Yogi stayed to be a regular person. And you know, so I think that really tied him. And I'll say this about his playing career. One of the things that, you know, you mentioned DiMaggio on one end and Mantle on the other. What really surprised me, and this was the person that my father was talking about, the best team in history is the 1949 to 1953 Yankees, which won 5 straight World Series. Hadn't done before, will never be done again. And the best player on that team was Yogi Berra by far. It was the end of DiMaggio's career, those last 3 years of his career. One was hurt, one he played half the season. He had one good season. Mickey Mantle started in 51. He struck out more than he hit. And he didn't really hit his stride until 55, 56. So for those years, playing the most important position, mind you, catcher, playing 141 games a season out of 154, playing back-to-back double headers, who's hitting 30 home runs, which as a catcher didn't happen, batting close to 300 or up to 320, knocking in 100 runs a year, handling a pitching staff that in his entire career, which 10 titles had one Hall of Fame pitcher on it, Whitey Ford, is Yogi Berra. And I'm like everybody else in New York of my era, I grew up thinking Mickey Mantle was the greatest player in the world. You look at Mount Rushmore of Yankees, and it's Ruth, it's Gehrig, it's DiMaggio, it's Mantle. When about halfway through this book, I figured, okay, Yogi is at least, there's got to be 4A and 4B. And then by the time I finished it, I was convinced that Yogi Berra was the fourth best player ever to put on the pinstripes. And
Wow.
that's saying a lot.
Yeah, no kidding. And like you were saying, talk about an era of, today it's all load management and all that, but not back then, right? They would chop you right back out for double headers and away you go.
God, yes. Yeah, he averaged about 20 to 22 double headers, which we don't even play anymore, a year. He would play back-to-back double headers in August and in September. Yeah. And so it's a miracle that the guy's career batting average is 285. I mean, if he's playing left field, which he almost played, he's easily a 300 hitter. He had unbelievable hand-eye coordination. Yeah. And when Casey Stengel, I mean, it's not like the Yankees didn't have good backup catchers. They would leave like Sherman Lawler and become an all-star. When Casey was asked, so why do you play Yogi so much? And he said, when Mr. Berra is catching, we win World Series. Yeah. And they did. So that was that.
Pretty simple equation there, right? So, I mean, almost as famous as his baseball, persona, you've also got the sort of quotable Yogiisms that have almost taken on mythological status and all that. Right. But Yogi even said, not all of those things that you read are things that I actually
never said everything I said.
Yeah.
Which is one of my favorites because it's accurate. He probably said, Yogi had a knack. It's just some people that grow up that just say things funny. Yeah. They don't even mean to. And he had that. Yeah. But Joe Garagiola, his best friend from the time he was 5 years old and Joe was 4, and they lived across the street from each other. Their fathers grew up together in the old country. And, Garagiola retires at 28, hits the banquet circuit, which the younger generation has no idea what that was. But basically, after the season, athletes would make money going to dinners and talking. And that was one of the problems with holding down their weight was all the banquets they would do, because people would pay him a couple of $100 to go and talk. And with Yogi, it was always Q&As. And Joe did that, and he worked his way up. He was a color announcer for the Cardinals, the hometown team, and he worked his way up and eventually became a superstar broadcaster. He's the host of the Today Show. He's a backup to Johnny Carson on the Tonight Show, which talk about cultural icons. Mm-hmm. He's the only guy. Carson took a night off when they booked the Beatles. So Joe Garagiola interviewed the Beatles. Yeah. And one of the mainstays in Joe's act, such as it was Yogi stories. So, so he was like the Johnny Appleseed, spreading Yogi stories far and wide. Yogi had great exposure. He did 2 movies. Cameos with Cary Grant, Doris Day, and Marilyn Monroe. So it's not like he's in B movies. Yeah. So he was out there, and he was just, he was a really, really unique guy. And this book ends up being 506 pages of text. Don't count the index and the bibliography. Yeah. I cut 60 pages out before I gave it to the publisher, and and they were just stories I couldn't get in because, I said, okay, there's doubles here of the same kind of stories. They're both great, but something's got to go, or this book is going to be 2 volumes.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite Yogiism? Do you have a favorite Yogiism story or quote that he ever threw out there that still makes you chuckle to this day?
Well, I tell you what, one that really hits me the right way is when you come to the fork in the road, take it. And the reason is that, I spent a lot of time in Montclair, New Jersey, which is about 2.5 hours from my house. And to go there, you come to a spot and it's a fork in the road. and they actually have a rock there now where the saying is carved in and the street sign. And what it is, you know, you can go both ways, but it's a circular road that far further down comes to the same place, and that's Yogi's Street.
Yeah.
So it made perfect sense. But when you hear it, you can't help but laugh, and you have no idea what he means.
Yeah.
You know? So that one's my favorite.
Yeah. So in the pantheon of, you know, sort of weird seeing an athlete in a different jersey, you know, you've got the Joe Montana with the Chiefs, you've got Michael
Right.
Jordan wearing the Wizards jersey. As a Yankees fan, was it really just a strange sight seeing him as manager of the Mets there wearing a New York Mets jersey for years on ends?
I'll tell you, it was jarring, and I gotta tell you that I mean, I'm a lifelong baseball fan.
Yeah.
All the sports, that's the one that's just part of who I am. And when I was doing the research for this, I'm leafing through pictures, and I come to a picture of Carmen, his wife, sitting on his lap, and they're both wearing New York Mets uniforms. And it was like, I looked at this going, is this a joke? And I had to remember that it was not just that he was there, but he was there for 10 years.
Yeah.
And so that, yes, that was very strange. You know, he has the distinction of being the first manager who managed the team to the World Series in both leagues.
Mhm.
He won with, 1973. They're up 3-2 on the dynastic Oakland A's, with a team that was 4 games over 500. Still the worst record of any team that ever made it to the World Series. He was a really good manager. And he came back to the Yankees after, you know, a nice run with the Mets, and was a coach, and was kind of the tranquility coach, because this was during the time when the Yankees, when George was the cliche George, the craziest of the crazy. And I got to tell you, I was a sports editor during this era, and I had trouble finding anyone who would want to cover the Yankees.
Yeah.
You know, because it was just you didn't cover baseball, you covered a real live daily soap opera with Billy Martin and George being the 2 craziest people I think I've ever met in sports.
Yeah.
And Carmen never wanted Yogi to manage. She didn't want him to have to go through the whole thing. He's not that smart, again, type stuff. And he, you know, when he took this job in after the '83 season, you knew it was doomed to fail, because George was George. And it ended ugly with, 16 games into the second season, his son on the team, and they fire him, and George fires him by sending his general manager, not even having the courtesy to do it himself. And that led to 14 years of Yogi not being part of the New York Yankees. And when Yogi Berra looked in the mirror, he saw pinstripes.
Yeah.
And so it had to really hurt him not to be part of that life. And thankfully, him and George made up. And in January of '99, and for the rest of his life, he was a fixture back at Yankee Stadium, and he was as famous probably as he was as a player. And I mean, first of all, how many people upstaged the Affleck Duck?
Yeah.
And Yogi was in so many commercials, and he was always at the big Yankee games. He was at the World Series when the Yankees were there, and which was a lot during this time. And he went to the old timers games, and he was just so unbelievably popular.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's maybe even a good segue as well to sort of shifting focus to what's going on in Major League Baseball right now. Because, I mean, speaking of the Mets, here we find ourselves in the middle of a pandemic. No one's really spending too much money making any splashy trades, and they're just wheeling and dealing. They're making trades with Cleveland and bringing in Lindor and the boys there. They're making some flashy free agent signings. What do you think that they're doing over there, and what kind of a job or grade would you sort of assign them right now?
Well, I'll tell you, they are they're certainly one of the most unique situations in baseball right now. I mean, the Fred Wilpon, a long time owner of the Mets, bought it from the original family, and he lost a ton of money, and it took an awful lot toll on him on the Madoff scandal. and the Mets have been kind of a mess since then. And he let his son run the team, and it's weird how sons kind of screw up teams, no matter what sport it is, for the most part. and so they've been looking to sell for a while, and Steve Cohen, who has a lot of money, he's in New York, and Steve Cohen, you have no idea who Steve Cohen is. No one listening here who has any idea who Steve Cohen is. He's a billionaire hedge fund guy who is in his business is hugely famous. But you don't get fame until you own a sports team. If you're someone like him, now everybody knows who he is, and he's got the money to spend, and so he's in the most competitive market. He's going up against the New York Yankees, who's probably the most famous franchise in all of sports. And so he's not going to sit there and be, and be number two if he can help it. So he's going to spend money, which kind of puts a spotlight on the Yankees, who look, their salary, their payroll now is about $210 million, and people here have complained that they don't go out and spend the kind of money that George used to spend, and the reason is because they don't want to go over the luxury cap, because the Yankees, the way baseball's contract is structured, if the Yankees go over the salary cap, they pay 50 cents on the dollar for every dollar after that. And Lon Trost, who is their COO, asked me one day when Max Scherzer was on the market, he said, "You think Max Scherzer is worth $48 million a year?" And I go, "No way. I mean, it's not my money, but I don't even think I'd spend somebody else's money like that." He goes, that's what it would cost the New York Yankees to bring Max Scherzer in. And it's like, okay, and that kind of explains a lot of what's going on now and why the union is going to draw a hard line in the sand in the baseball negotiations that will go on this year, even though there's a pandemic, that the luxury tax has to change. And because it has become a de facto salary cap. And that's the one thing that is, the two dirtiest words in the vocabulary for the union. On the other hand, the owners think that the union is weak, that the players aren't as united as they were under Don Thier and Michael Weiner, who followed him, and that's probably true. That the leadership is not as strong as it was when labor lawyers led the union, and that's probably true. And there are still some hardline owners from the old days who still want to see this union, put in its place. And there's a lot of guys that are used to making a lot of money. If they can lower their costs, they're going to do it. So I think what we saw at the beginning when they couldn't come to terms, which was horrible public relations to play during the pandemic. I think that was a preview of what we're going to see from this one. And if there's not a labor, whether a strike late in the season or a lockout going into 2022 because they haven't come to a contract, that would surprise me.
Yeah. Well, you just sort of hit on it. Obviously, we had all the leagues came to a stop at the same time. We had hockey, we had football, we had basketball, all at least put out their plans of, okay, here's what we're going to do. Some of them even got up and going. And it was just dragging on between negotiations between the union and the owners. And they finally got their act together and got their modified season in. But that was,
the goodwill that they lost. They could have, for one thing, everyone is like just desperate for something to take their mind off of what's going on, because this is at the height of the first surge. Not that it's not really bad now, because it is, but at least we have the vaccine and a possible solution. Back then, we had no idea what we were dealing with. And they could have come in and supplied some relief. And instead, both sides came off as unbelievably greedy, completely insensitive to the needs and wants and the lives of their fans. Which probably was true. and thankfully they played. It was a strange season. I never thought they'd get through the season, quite frankly. They did. I follow the Yankees, when when the last game of the season doesn't end with the Yankees holding a trophy, it's kind of a strange year for us, which has been a lot of years now. And but you know, watch. I was more surprised that football is making it through the whole season. I talked to a college guy at the University of North Carolina because I'm thinking about doing a book on Dean Smith for my next book, and they have only athletes on campus, and he doesn't know even day of game whether the game that they're going to play is canceled because the test could come in and 3 guys could have COVID. And so it's really been strange. And I don't think that the coming season will be a normal quote unquote season. I think we're probably not going to get there until 2022, but I think the labor problems are going to hover over whatever kind of season we end up having.
Yeah. If you were a betting man, would you think that, the players union is going to try and leverage the fact that maybe mid-season they do sort of do that, like whatever it was, 1994, where they did the strike halfway through to try and really put the screws to the owners here? Or do you think that they'll probably get the season going, it'll be grumbling on both sides, but it'll be an off-season issue that they'll try and remedy heading into next year?
Yeah, I think the season will start. I think the answer to your question lies with how much of a hard line the owners are going to take. I mean, if they do not budge at all and show absolutely no sign of, which is the way they used to negotiate, here it is, take it, or we shut it down. Yeah. I think that could end up being a strike because that's when the players have the most leverage. Yeah. Because then there's money on the table. You strike in August before the stretch run and the World Series. And, the baseball contracts are backloaded to the playoffs, TV contracts, and so that's when they have their leverage. And we'll see what happens. Back then you used to have, not only was there a solid leadership in Don Fehr and Gene Orzer and Michael Weiner and Lauren Rich and people like that, really sharp labor lawyers, but they had the David Cohns and the Cecil Fielders and the Tom Glavins, people who, as players and star players, really held it together. Now it's a different world. I mean, it's not like the stars back then didn't make, relative to you and me, a ton of money. But if you're a star now, you basically are your own business center. Yeah. And everything, the world revolves around you, because it does. I mean, you're making, like Garrett Cole makes $35 million and all the extensions off of Garrett Cole, and it's so, and the Yankees have many of those, and most teams have at least some of those. And even, I mean, the major league minimum is $600,000 plus the $200,000 you're making for the card contract from the union, and sort of other things. And you're at least making $1 million, which is not too bad. So it's harder, I think, for the union to get the kind of solidarity they had. And there was a sense of the guys that went before us. I wrote extensively about this in my first book. The guys who went before us, we're not going to, diss the sacrifices they made to give us what we got. And we're going to be there for the players who come after us. That was a big part of the union ethos. And I'm not sure that is there in this generation's player. I think we'll find out, because I think it's going to be rocky.
Yeah. Do you think that the MLB's hiring of Theo Epstein might, modernize some of their thinking at all in terms of how they're going to approach this, and maybe he can speak to more of a player's perspective? And he's a young guy himself. He's famously forward thinking, and how can we improve this? How can we make things better? Do you think he'll play a key role in these labor negotiations going into this season and beyond?
I mean, he might as a de facto or behind the scenes point person, because he does have relationships with the current ball players. He's also very smart. I mean, he obviously knows what he's doing, but I think they hired him because he knows what he's doing. I mean, he's got baseball has a age problem. Most baseball fans are baby boomers, and the younger generation isn't as into baseball. It's declined for years now. And I think Theo Epstein, they brought him in as one of the people that can figure out how to recapture some of that. Not that baseball isn't thriving, because it is. One of the things I can't stand, and maybe I'm showing my age, but they've tried to kind of cop the feeling of an NBA arena. Mm-hmm. And so I go to baseball games now where I love the fact that it's 3 hours long and it's outdoors and it's green and it's, and you can sit and you can talk to your friends. And instead, every minute is filled with music and flashing light bars and things on the scoreboard. And it's like, guys, that's not baseball to me. But that's me. I think Epstein was brought in for that kind of sensibility. And I got to tell you, it's interesting. I know Brian Cashman pretty well from the 2 books that I did. And the Yankees were a big part of the first book. And Cashman has a unique job. No other general manager has the kind of demands that a Yankee general manager has, and certainly one that was general manager for George Steinbrenner. Mm-hmm. And I don't ever think he gets the credit that he deserves. It's almost, well, you're supposed to win, and if you don't, then you fail. And I think there's a thing between him and, in his mind, Theo Epstein, because who were the 2 youngest at the time general managers. But man, I mean, Epstein walks in the Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. I mean, the guy wins with the Red Sox and wins with the Cubs. Yeah. And no one for 100 years had ever done either, and he did both. Yeah. So you kind of have to say, I mean, I did a story on him early in his career, because I mean, he was 28 when they made him general manager. Interesting family life. His grandfather and twin brother wrote Casablanca. His father's the head of creative writing and a novelist for Boston University. His sister is a screenwriter for a number of high-profile TV shows. So the bar is pretty high in his family to succeed, and I think he's met it.
Yeah. Do you think MLB is possibly even, really forward thinking here and trying to bring him on board to possibly even groom him to be the next commissioner after Manfred?
No, Theo Epstein's too much of his own guy. I mean, for all of the aura they try to put around the commissioner is, the CEO and reports to a board, and the board are the owners. I mean, he is not the fans' representative. Sure, he has to think about the fans because the fans are part of the business, but that's not his responsibility. His responsibility is the 30 ownership groups, beginning, end. And, I mean, Manfred was a terrific choice. Well steeped in not only just labor relations, because that's what he went to Harvard for, and he knows his stuff, but the history of going through strikes, including 94 when he was there when they shut the game down. He was there in 2002 and was a key player when they finally broke the logjam and didn't have a labor stoppage for the first time since free agency. So I think he was a good choice, and he's a good guy. But he does what, he reports to the owners. And so I don't think Theo Epstein is that kind of guy. I mean, talk to Faye Vincent about, the illusion. He thought he was the commissioner, and they fired him, pretty quickly.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, Jon, thank you so much. I could sit here and try and pick your brain for hours, and we could turn this into a 5-hour episode here. But we appreciate you sitting down. And for those that are listening, go out and get your copy right now. The book is Yogi: A Life Behind the Mask. It's available everywhere. It's a phenomenal read. Highly recommend it. Jon, thank you very much.
My pleasure, Carl. Anytime.